Alistair Drennan ruled Glasgow's underworld with brutal precision, while Ewan MacRae united Scotland's scattered gangs in a last-ditch rebellion. But neither of them saw the ghost coming, a nameless force that would dismantle their empires from the shadows and bring Scotland's most feared criminals to their knees. Scotland's criminal underworld had always been fragmented, scattered groups operating in the shadows, fueled by desperation and petty rivalries. But everything changed in the early 2000s with the sudden rise of a gang unlike any the country had seen before. This wasn't just a group of thugs smashing bottles in alleyways. It was calculated, precise, ruthless. They called themselves the Lochmoor Syndicate. At the center of this machine was Alistair "the Wolf" Drennan, a man who defied every stereotype of a gang leader. He wasn't raised on violence. He didn't come from the streets. He had once worn tailored suits and sat behind a desk as a respected financial advisor in Edinburgh, but after being implicated in a money laundering scheme that cost him his career, his prison sentence changed him. He didn't come out broken. He came out with a plan. In prison, he observed how crime worked, who had influence, who was feared, who talked too much, and when he was released, he began building something of his own. Drennan recruited methodically. He didn't want chaos. He wanted a structure. His first choice was Marcus Galt, a former British soldier with 2 tours in the Middle East and a reputation for keeping his cool under pressure. Galt had left the military under suspicious circumstances and was surviving off odd security jobs until Drennan offered him something more permanent: protection, money, and purpose. Next came Declan Shaw, a young street racer known for his reckless driving and quick temper. Shaw was unpredictable but talented. He had a knack for making things disappear: cars, people, evidence. Drennan knew how to control him, pairing him with more grounded members and rewarding his loyalty with fast money and faster cars. Together, they formed the Syndicate's core: brains, muscle, and chaos, all under control. The Syndicate didn't draw attention with flashy crimes. They began by targeting weaknesses in the system: small docks where customs checks were sloppy, nightclubs eager for cash infusions, and low-level dealers looking for protection. They took over territories not with bullets, but with business proposals. Work with us or disappear. Most chose the first option. The ones who didn't? Their names faded quietly from memory. Over the next 5 years, the Lochmoor Syndicate expanded like a virus. They used legitimate businesses to hide dirty money. They purchased warehouses near the Clyde River, using them as hubs for drug trafficking routes imported from Ireland and Eastern Europe. Local politicians were bribed. Police were paid to look the other way. Even rival gangs began adopting their methods, out of respect or fear. But it wasn't just the money or power that made Lochmoor feared. It was how they operated. Drennan implemented a strict code: no unnecessary violence, no public attention, and absolute loyalty. Disobedience was punished swiftly and silently. One enforcer who leaked shipment routes to a rival was found in a drainage pipe outside Dundee, his throat cut and his wrists tied behind his back with fishing wire. No message, no warning. Everyone understood. Inside the organization, ranks were clear. Orders flowed from Drennan through Galt and Shaw, and then down to the lieutenants who ran regional operations. Meetings were rare and masked as business conferences. Communication was done using burner phones and coded language. Even low-level members didn't know much, just their role and what would happen if they spoke out of turn. As police intelligence units tried to map the Syndicate's structure, they kept running into dead ends. Informants would go dark. Surveillance. Footage would vanish. Paper trails were always clean. It was as if the Syndicate didn't exist until the bodies started piling up. By 2007, the Syndicate's grip on Glasgow's East End was absolute. Crime statistics told one story, but the streets told another. Lochmoor didn't just control the criminal world, they shaped it. And while other gangs fought over scraps, Alistair Drennan sat above them all, pulling strings, always unseen, always in control. While the Lochmoor Syndicate thrived in Glasgow, their growing dominance sparked quiet unrest in other parts of Scotland. Smaller gangs in Stirling, Dundee, Falkirk and Perth had survived by keeping their operations low profile, relying on localized extortion, smuggling and illegal betting rings. But as Lochmoor's influence spread beyond Glasgow, those smaller players saw the writing on the wall. Alistair Drennan wasn't just expanding, he was absorbing. To the syndicate, these smaller groups weren't rivals, they were future acquisitions. That's when something unexpected happened. Instead of being picked off one by one, 4 major gangs from central Scotland did the unthinkable. They united. This rare alliance became known as the Black Bannockburn Pact. The name was symbolic, referencing the famous 1314 battle where Scottish forces had united against English rule. In this new version of history, the enemy wasn't an army, it was the syndicate. At the helm of the pact stood Ewan MacRae, a sharp and brutal man with deep roots in Stirling's dockyards. MacRae wasn't polished like Drennan, but he was cunning. He had spent years managing union movements, illegal shipping scams, and backroom deals. He knew people, and more importantly, he knew how to make people fear him. MacRae didn't want war, at least not at first. His plan was to negotiate a seat at the table. He offered Drennan a proposal: shared territory, resource pooling, and joint control of trafficking routes between Edinburgh and Glasgow. But Drennan dismissed the offer without ceremony. The syndicate didn't share, they consumed. That rejection sealed MacRae's decision. If Lochmoor wouldn't compromise, the pact would dismantle it piece by piece. The Black Bannockburn Pact began their assault in calculated silence. They didn't aim for leaders, they targeted operations. In late 2008, a syndicate warehouse in Leith packed with nearly $2 million in imported cocaine mysteriously caught fire. No alarms, no witnesses, no survivors. Days later, 2 of Drennan's lieutenants were discovered in the Highlands. Their bodies were posed deliberately, hands bound, eyes removed, placed in shallow graves just off a remote forestry trail. It wasn't just murder. It was ritual. It was a warning. Drennan's response was swift and severe. He activated his inner circle. Declan Shaw was dispatched to disrupt the pact's smuggling routes. He began intercepting cargo shipments, corrupting dock officials and sabotaging vehicles before they reached key destinations. At the same time, Marcus Galt led strategic hit squads into Stirling and Perth. These weren't public displays of violence. They were clean eliminations. Houses were raided in the dead of night. Security cameras were disabled. No fingerprints. No noise. Just silence and death. For 9 months, the 2 factions waged a shadow war across Scotland. Civilians remained largely unaware, as the violence rarely spilled onto the streets. But the death toll kept climbing. At least 23 known figures disappeared or were found dead. Safe houses were bombed. Smugglers switched loyalties under threat or cash. Police struggled to keep up, often discovering evidence too late or finding themselves outmaneuvered by both sides. One detective described the conflict as a war fought in the dark, with no rules, no mercy, and no end in sight. But something about the Black Bannockburn Pact began to unravel. Their alliance was built on shared fear, not trust. Some of the smaller gangs resented MacRae's authority. Accusations of betrayal surfaced. One gang from Falkirk reportedly began secret negotiations with Lochmoor, hoping to trade information for protection. The syndicate, sensing weakness, doubled down. Yet just when Lochmoor seemed ready to regain complete control, new disruptions began. Communications were intercepted. Secret meetings were leaked. Raids happened too quickly, almost as if someone from within was feeding information to the police or to someone else entirely. Unknown to both sides, a third force had entered the game. And unlike Lochmoor or Bannockburn, this one had no interest in money, power, or territory. It moved in silence, without allegiance, and with a single destructive mission: to tear everything down. Neither Drennan nor McRae realized that the true threat wasn't each other. It was the shadow quietly watching them both. From the windswept streets of Inverness to the industrial alleys of Glasgow, whispers began to spread. A shadow had entered the war. It didn't wear colors. It didn't claim territory. It didn't recruit, threaten, or negotiate. It moved in silence, struck with precision, and disappeared without trace. They called it the Ghost of Inverness. At first, neither the Lochmoor Syndicate nor the remnants of the Black Bannockburn Pact believed in the ghost. The name sounded like an urban myth, a distraction. But events that followed couldn't be explained by coincidence or luck. Entire operations collapsed overnight. Drug shipments vanished between checkpoints. Confidential police files were stolen, exposing officers on gang payrolls. 2 syndicate accountants were found hanging in their own apartments, weeks apart, both with the same cryptic note pinned to their shirts. Clean your books. Alistair Drennan, always composed, was now unsettled. This wasn't the work of the Bannockburn Pact. They were struggling to hold themselves together. And it didn't feel like the police either. Whoever this was had resources, intelligence, and a purpose beyond profit. Drennan ordered Marcus, Galt to begin a full sweep of their inner ranks. Phones were destroyed. Meetings went silent. Surveillance was tightened. But no leads emerged. The ghost wasn't inside the syndicate. He was outside, and always one step ahead. For the Pact, things were even worse. Already fractured by internal distrust, they fell into complete paranoia. Ewan McRae believed he had a mole in his core circle and began eliminating his own men. 3 lieutenants disappeared in a single month. But the hits kept coming. Warehouses burned, safe houses raided, gun shipments traced and seized. The remaining factions began defecting, not to Lochmoor, but to nowhere at all. They just vanished. Some to protect themselves, others in fear that they'd be next. As chaos deepened, the ghost's signature emerged. He left no physical evidence, but always a trace of disruption. Cameras looped seconds before attacks, encrypted messages broadcasted on intercepted radio frequencies, anonymous, emails sent to law enforcement with exact coordinates of hidden weapons caches. In one instance, a planned arms deal involving both syndicate and former Pact members was interrupted by a power outage followed by a flood of spotlights and sirens. But when police arrived, there were no criminals, just the contraband, neatly stacked, tagged, and ready for seizure. Desperate, Drennan called a private meeting between his closest associates. He proposed one last move: capture the ghost. 5 of his most trusted operatives were dispatched north, their mission clear: find the source of the disruption and eliminate it. They followed a trail of false leads to Aberdeen, then Inverness. Then nothing. Weeks passed. No word, no bodies, no evidence they'd ever made it to their final destination. Then one was found. In a hospital ward in Aberdeen, a man identified as Callum Firth, one of Drennan's top enforcers, was discovered, unconscious on the edge of the city. His injuries were severe. His tongue had been removed, his ribs shattered. Burned into the skin of his chest was a single letter: G. No one knew what it stood for. Ghost, game, grave. It didn't matter. The message was clear: stay out of the north. The effect was instant. Fear spread through both Lochmoor and what remained of the Pact. Every plan, every alliance, every transaction was now shadowed by uncertainty. Who was listening? Who was leaking? Members began operating alone, ignoring orders, fleeing the country, going silent. The fear of Drennan had been replaced by fear of something they couldn't see, couldn't bribe, and couldn't kill. Even the police were confused. Anonymous packages continued arriving at their offices: flash drives, photos, recordings. Each one more detailed than the last. Each one revealing secrets no outsider should know. Yet when they tried to trace the origin, they found nothing. Not a fingerprint, not a digital footprint. Nothing. The ghost had no face, no motive, no identity. But he had control. And now, with both gangs destabilized, he was closer than ever to achieving what the police, rival factions, and years of crackdowns had failed to do: bring Scotland's most feared criminal empires to their knees. Winter descended on Scotland with a cruel stillness, cloaking the cities in grey and shadows. The streets were quieter, but the tension in the criminal world was thicker than ever. Both the Lochmoor Syndicate and the Black Bannockburn Pact were shells of what they once were. The Ghost had done more than damage their operations. He had destroyed trust. Every whisper of a plan was followed by silence. Every new recruit was seen as a threat. Neither gang dared move without double-checking every detail, and even then, they hesitated. That hesitation was deadly. Alistair Drennan had retreated to a remote estate on the outskirts of Lochmoor, surrounded by bodyguards and surveillance. He no longer trusted the lieutenants who had built his empire, not even Marcus Galt. Drennan believed someone had broken the code, leaked information from within, fed the Ghost everything. But despite endless interrogations and internal checks, no traitor was ever found. Drennan, the once cold mastermind, had become paranoid and erratic. The empire he'd constructed with precision was now ruled by fear. Meanwhile, Ewan McRae, aging and tired, had all but vanished from the criminal map. He left Stirling one night and was never seen again. Rumours swirled. Some said he'd fled to Ireland under a new name. Others believed the Ghost had gotten to him too. But there were no confirmations, no messages, and no trace. The remaining fragments of the pact either defected, retired, or were hunted down, some by the Syndicate, others by the Ghost. By early spring, the two once dominant forces of Scottish organized crime were fractured beyond recognition. But just when it seemed the storm had passed, a new wave of revelations surfaced. A leaked audio file landed anonymously in the inbox of a major newspaper editor in Edinburgh. The file contained a private conversation between high-ranking syndicate members discussing a secret offshore account tied to a murdered police official. Within days, headlines exploded. News outlets ran exposés linking Lochmoor leaders to several unsolved killings, corrupt politicians, and even a major construction project in Glasgow tied to laundering millions. Public outrage surged. The government was forced to act. Major raids swept across Scotland. Dozens of properties were seized. Hidden compartments in luxury homes were uncovered, filled with weapons, documents, and cash. Former allies turned informants, lured by protection deals and fear of death. One by one, known syndicate names began appearing in courtrooms, escorted in silence, their faces hollow. Drennan, the man who had ruled from the shadows, was arrested at his estate. He did not resist. He did not speak. His silence said more than any confession ever could, but even then the Ghost remained invisible. Law enforcement tried to find him, or her, but found nothing. Despite every effort, no trace of the Ghost's identity emerged. Some believed it was a former intelligence operative gone rogue. Others thought it was a vigilante ex-cop whose family had been destroyed by gang violence. A few even suspected the Ghost didn't exist at all, that it was a myth, a mask used by a small team of hackers and insiders. But deep down, those who had lived through the chaos knew better. The precision, the planning, the personal signatures, it was the work of one person, someone watching, calculating, cleaning up a world drowning in crime. Years passed. Crime in Scotland didn't vanish, but it changed. The sprawling empires were gone. Smaller gangs operated, but none dared grow too large. None dared claim too much power. The memory of the Syndicate and the Pact remained only in news archives and whispered conversations. And in every criminal circle, one question still echoed. Who was the Ghost? No one had the answer. But the silence that followed served as the final warning. Somewhere out there, the Ghost was still watching. And in the world of crime, fear of the unknown was often more powerful than any weapon.